Good morning and Assalamu alaikum everybody. Another day with the pandemic, another morning. हम लोग हर रोज ये बात कर रहे हैं कि responsible, how to be responsible citizens, how to be responsible Pakistanis, क्योंकि इस वक्त बहुत सारे ममालिक खुलते जा रहे हैं. They're opening their borders, they're opening their shops, they're opening work slowly but surely, and it doesn't look like that's, I mean, we haven't closed down जब से लॉकडाउन खुला है, लेकिन ये हमारे हाथ में है कि हम कितनी जल्दी इस वबा से टैकल करना समझें और सीखें. Just yesterday I was reading many reports, Hookie reports, some UK university stats, कि by July the numbers are going to increase so much अगर lockdown impose नहीं हुआ पाकिस्तान में, and by 10th of August we are looking at a lot of deaths. Death toll जो है पाकिस्तान में बहुत ज़्यादा तेज़ी से बढ़ने वाला है. So a couple of things, a couple of conversations, बहुत सारे businesses जो हैं वो इस वक्त posts लगा रहे हैं कि you know, sadly and unfortunately after many years we are shutting down. Small home-owned businesses जो औरतें या ख़वातीन घरों से चलाती थी या मर्द हजरात घर से बैठ के उनको नेविगेट करते थे, इस वक्त बहुत ज़्यादा फाइनेंशियल डिस्ट्रेस है, बहुत ज़्यादा स्ट्रेस है, मेंटल एंजाइटी है. So again, if you need to reach out to somebody, if you need to talk to somebody, अगर आप किसी से बात करना चाहते हैं, please message. There is also on the Facebook page for Special Needs Pakistan, आपके left hand side पे there is a mentorship program. There are a lot of people on there जिनको आप reach out कर सकते हैं to talk and to understand and to survive this struggle, because everybody is struggling in different capacities. And talking about struggle, आज हमारे साथ फजली अजीम हैं, who has been a self-advocate for autism in Pakistan since 2006. उनके बारे में मैंने काफ़ी पढ़ा, काफ़ी रिसर्च करी. अभी भी हम जब बात कर रहे थे तो he reminded me कि at the TEDx Karachi in 2014, I was sitting behind you. He was sitting beside my sister, and you know, one of these things, ये हमारी कितनी close conversations होती हैं, कितनी close मुलाकातें होती हैं, लेकिन जब हम actually किसी की story and journey सुनते हैं, समझते हैं, उससे connect करते हैं, we are able to understand how much we can do, how much we can do for ourselves, our self-love, our self-understanding, our self-motivation. So Fazli is one of the Fulbright scholars of 2012-2014. He has done his MFA in design and at Mass Art and MIT Media Lab, and he is currently an assistant professor of design at the Department of Media Sciences at Zabist, Karachi. And he is going to join us on the stream right now. Assalamu alaikum, Fazli.
Waalaikum.
How are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Fazli, you have a huge resume. You've conducted itni sari workshops. You've trained people. You were nominated for 2017 IIM Karachi Ardeshwar Kavasji Award for inclusion by now PDP. You have been an advocate and a person who has persevered itne saal. What has been the motivation behind all of this advocacy of Fazli Aziz?
Okay, so I think probably the one driving factor was that, you know, my parents used to always talk about their parents, you know, their grandparents and so on, and they always had this sort of desire that you know, they would continue on their legacy, which was education. So my ancestors were primarily teachers. They've been teaching on and off for many generations, and but the current generation, there's you know, now I think there's a resurgence in the sense that my sister and brother-in-law and a few others are now teachers full time. But before that, my father's sort of generation, there was none. So no one was continuing on down that path of service, of educating people. So you grew up with these stories, you grew up with their desires, their wishes, you grew up with things that like, I'm assuming some people grew up with their parents talking about how they always wanted to be a doctor and they couldn't be one, and they kind of push that on their children, fairly or unfairly. I guess that was a lot that I heard when growing up about education, being an educator. So on and off, full time, part time. I have always been an educator. I think for the past 15 to 20 years now, and now full time as an educator. So that those stories were always there. And also, I think the fact that I learned from a very young age reading. I was a young reader. I had hyperlexia, so I could read pretty fast, and mostly self-taught, because the problem in the school was structure, loud noises, distractions. So I was learning more at home or in the library alone, as opposed to in that network social environment. So I learned in a way by reading books that you cannot make everyone happy. It's impossible. You just have to try your best, and with the right intention, and do what you can do, because everyone can do something, and everyone is different. We're all born with different abilities. You cannot judge everyone the same way. The educational model, being a teacher now, I realize, is very much broken. It judges people on benchmarks and things that only apply to a certain population or percentage of children. Not everyone can be judged the same way because of neuroplasticity, because of our innate uniqueness. And that uniqueness is something that, I guess, in the West has become more of a established paradigm, in the sense that people accept it, they respect it, they encourage it, they celebrate it. But I believe in our society, or perhaps the countries that are still developing, there's a lot of fear for change, and there's a pressure to be the same or the same way. And I believe that narrative is slowly changing, and it needs to change, perhaps faster, for innovation and good progress to happen.
That cookie cutter, wo jo, you have to be at the same level in the classroom. It's a mainstream education dilemma. Just yesterday, my husband and I were talking. My husband grew up in Nigeria, and वो बता रहे थे कि in his school there used to be this AP program. So for all the children who had advanced learning capabilities,
Advanced placement.
exactly, advanced placement. So the AP program would be 1 hour of 60 minutes of pure challenge to jog a child's skills and his memory and his everything, because he could do more math or tougher math than his average level peers. But when we are talking about cookie cutter images, and when we are talking about individualistic learnings, जैसे कि आपने कहा कि you were an avid reader and you started very early. When was the first time that you realized? You said that it was the loud noises, or the atmosphere, or the ambience. When was the first time that you realized that the fit is different?
I still remember that day. I think it was maybe the 4th of May or the 5th of May. This is back in 1986, maybe. I was perhaps 5 years old. And I remember, I don't know why I remember that day even today, that I believe my apartment at that time, I was living with I was of course very young. So I was playing alone in my room, and I had a aquarium with fish in it, and apparently the fish, and that was 2 rooms away. So the fish jumped out of the aquarium and landed on the carpet, and I could hear it 2 rooms away. And I obviously went there and picked it up and put it back in the aquarium. So I still don't understand how did that happen. How was I able to hear that? And things got progressively worse as time went on, because living at that age in a area where other houses and apartments are close by, I could hear conversations, people talking on the phone in the next apartment. I could hear cars, like far away honking and so on. It was very distracting. And as such, even in the school environment where the bell rings when the period changes, that was a very painful noise, or the noise of children crying, or even somebody washing the dishes. really can't explain why it's so painful. Or sometimes the fan is sort of this fluctuation, so the fan is making some kind of noise, and that causes me to wake up at night, because I can actually hear that variation or change. So the sensory issues were there, and they progressively got more and more until I learned in some forms to control them or to divert them, as we do in occupational therapy practices, which are now practiced generally. So it was at quite a young age that I understood that my sensory input was very different, because things which I could pick up were not, and it wasn't bothering people around me at all. Uh, do I continue? Can you see me?
Sorry, Fazli, I think there was a bit of
Yes, right. I can hear you now.
yes.
So did I stop at some point?
You
What was the last thing you heard?
you were at the through occupational therapy.
Right. So occupational therapy practice now looks at the process of desensitization. And so for people who have highly developed senses or acute senses, or very sensitive or even unsensitive areas where they are, I think it's called hyper focus or hypo focus, HYPO. So, either too much or too little. So in both cases, occupational therapists are of course trained in these things now to reduce or to manage sensory overload. So this was the first thing that I observed, and I still remember. The second thing was the communication challenges. The whole not understanding grammar or patterns and repeating things that people are saying back to them. So I believe this is called echolalia,
Yeah.
where you actually repeat what you are hearing, not because you understand what's going on, but because it's like a Lego system, like A equals B. So if
Yeah.
somebody asks me a question, do you want water? And I want water, then I would actually repeat that statement, do you want water? So everyone used to find it very strange that I go around asking people, do you want water? When actually I wanted water, not them. I wanted them to give me water. But that was my understanding of language at a young age, that A equals B, sort of a very methodical, formulaic system.
And
And yeah, so continue. Yes, go ahead.
so over here, I just want to, for jo un sab parents ke liye who are watching, and who are still trying to understand their children, right? When was the first experience where your parents or somebody who was older in the household interjected, or where you were able to, whether you were perhaps be able to explain to them, or they were perhaps be able to understand, there is a gap?
Well, I think sensory issues were pretty much a point of contention, because for like I'll give an example. So I really had a problem going to the barber, not because I don't like barbers, but because of the scissors they use are made of metal usually, and that on my skin, that was a very strange sort of feeling. So I wasn't comfortable really. But I couldn't explain that, right, to my parents or to anyone. I didn't have the words to explain that, how I was feeling or how I felt about that. So I think my relatives used to like chase me around the table for a long time, until I got tired and I finally gave in, and they sort of dragged me to the barbers to get a haircut. So I'm just saying that there were a lot of examples like this where I didn't have the communicative language to explain what I was feeling, and that language only came much later in life. I would say maybe around the age of 25, really, when I found out about Asperger syndrome and autism spectrum disorders, and I got a later diagnosis. So I was not actually diagnosed as a child. I went to the regular education system, for better or worse. And this is something that has gone on for generations in my family, so I'm not unique. There were people like me with my behavior on both sides of my family. For many, many generations, both my parents can name uncles or aunts or cousins or people in their past, grandparents or their relatives and so on, with similar behavior. So my point being that autism is not something new. It has existed for generations, for perhaps thousands of years. There have always been people on the spectrum. It's just that the population now in the world of 7 billion or so people are so many that the population henceforth of people on the spectrum is also so great. And there are so many people now through inclusion that are coming forward and benefiting from education and using their gifts or abilities. And neurodiversity is sort of like a new word now, a buzzword because of that. So it's always been there.
And you just mentioned that people are stepping up, and in one of the when we were exchanging questions, one of the things you mentioned was that why are there only two self advocates for autism in Pakistan? And that opens up huge doors, because there are, like you mentioned, there are so many people who were children who have become adults now, and that has been the motto for Special Needs Pakistan platform when I started out 7 years ago, कि कहाँ हैं वो सब individuals जो इस वक्त 40 साल के हैं, 45 साल के हैं, and they should be on, they are on wheelchairs, but they are not in public because they should be outside. So why are they not outside? And here you are talking about self advocacy. Why do you think there are only two self advocates for autism in Pakistan?
Pakistan is maybe 200 to 220 million people, sixth most populous country in the world. 25% of Earth's population lives in South Asia. So a quarter of the people in the world actually live in this region. There's a lot of people in this region. In 2006, I started out as self-advocate, maybe recorded, possibly the first one. I don't know if any other person, but doing it back then. Now, I think last year, there's Ahmad Siddiqui, also a self-advocate. He's a recent IBA graduate. So it's pretty good what he's doing. But again, it's only very recently. And he's sort of a person who does believe in self-advocacy and coming forward, sharing his story. He has a Facebook page. And so that's a positive step. But what about places like India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka? I've been to these countries. I've been to conferences in these regions. I've talked to a lot of their people. There is no lack of people on the spectrum, diagnosed people, adults on the spectrum, children on the spectrum. What lacks is the concept of the self-advocate in South Asia region, particularly because society is perhaps problematic. They don't encourage variation and differences. Generally, everyone things should look the same. Everyone should pretend to be the same. So that's why I think, disability is something that's still uncomfortable to talk about. And obviously, that's changing as a concept of what the world is going through, and inclusion and new opinions coming forward. And again, my voice, maybe it's the first from Pakistan, but it's not the first in the world. I was looking at the posts of Dr. Temple Grandin. I was looking at the social media posts and the books of Stephen Shore and other self-advocates in the United States who somehow, through coincidence and through luck and through sheer will, I actually met, while I studied abroad. So, in connection to my research and my work with the autism spectrum. So the point here is that things are changing slowly, but they are not where they need to be. There's a lot more to go ahead. And I believe societal change, the media has a very important role and responsibility to play. What has happened in India and Bangladesh is just phenomenal. They have TV shows, they've got dramas, they've got sitcoms, they've got comedy shows, they've got movies on the subject of the autism spectrum and disability, special needs, dyslexia, all kinds of conditions, cerebral palsy, CP, and so on. And I believe that's amazing. That's a very progressive step, and I've seen it with my own eyes, going there in the conferences, talking to their leaders, talking to the people who are just parents. They're actually parents of kids, on the spectrum or with special needs, and they're the ones who made that change. So that's something I guess we can learn from. That it's not impossible. People in your neighboring countries have done it. You can also do it. It's just that there is this whole political thing that we don't talk to people in our neighboring countries for whatever reason. But that's not the right way forward, because what has happened across the world is that people who are in neighboring countries are contributing and collaborating through the United Nations. Incredible work has happened in the region, particularly in Bangladesh and India, that I've seen the last decade, and we can learn from them. It's not we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think our society, our media, a lot of them can take cues from what happened in other countries in South Asia.
Absolutely. And when you talk about parents becoming advocates first, जब बच्चे छोटे होते हैं and parents become advocates, it does a lot for self-esteem, for awareness, for confidence, and it allows the child, I feel, it allows the child to grow into a measure where they themselves, like you are today, they themselves become advocates later on, or mentors later on, because it is so important for young children to be able to understand, process the content that they have been born with. And it's all a processing, it's processing time. Growing, youth, adulthood, teenagers years, this is all processing time for our own selves. One of the things that somebody had messaged me was that children always look forward to that one person who's been their rock or who's been their support system, that titanium spine, so that they know that I have this supportive partner or this supporting advocate behind me. Who has been in your life? Who has been your strength?
It hasn't been one. I think it's been many, and primarily members of my family. Example, my mother was very understanding and encouraging to whatever I did, even though she probably didn't understand at that time what I was doing. I think my sister, my grandmother. You see, the unique dynamic in my family is that my sister is 9 years older to me, and obviously, so when I was born, I had my sister, I had my mother, and I had my grandmother. So in a way, I had three mothers to take care of me while I was growing up. And my sister is not like a sister; she's just like a mother to me, because of the age difference. There was a huge difference between us, between our ages. So she actually helped in raising me up also, and so I know very very grateful to that understanding relationship and support. But the point here is that it's not just them. It's not just immediate family. I've got cousins in my family who are more like brothers to me, and mentors. Who were there from a very young age, and they always, supported me, made me understand things, and were very patient with my lack of communication or confusions and misunderstandings and so on. And I think over the years, I've also been blessed probably to have a few good teachers who became role models from me outside the family. And they were, in a way, maybe free thinkers, maybe independent thinkers, or people who were thinking literally outside the box. They had very unconventional ideas, but they all had scientific ideas or ideas based on factual information, proven evidence, best practices, things which are provable, things which are more logical, and things which help progress and don't hurt anyone. So these kind of ideas are those that I grew up with, and shaped me to become first part-time and then full-time an educator myself.
And when we talk about shaping, Fazli, this is a conversation that I was having with you before we came live. It has been a debate since yesterday. A lot of the support group mothers are actually debating. Okay, knowing yourself and understanding yourself, right? What is, and like you said, that perhaps your mother didn't even realize what was, yes, there were different characteristics, but what was it? There was no label, there was nothing, right? And perhaps your sister was the main driving force, the person who led through, who was your advocate. For children who can understand, ठीक है, जो समझ पाते हैं, जिनको आप slowly समझा पाते हैं कि you are autistic, or you have Apert syndrome, or you have ADD, ADHD. We had Tazeen Shamsi, who was on with us, who was who lived with ADD, but it wasn't until later that she became an advocate for it by becoming a teacher herself. What is your take on explaining to children how to go about it, or how should parents go about it?
So one of the first things that I remember watching the television was, reruns of Star Trek that used to come, and this is the black and white old series on TV. With, I think, Mr. Spock, who was sort of an alien with sort of a personality disorder. that now people claim is very similar to the phenotype or the behaviors patterned in high functioning autism or Asperger syndrome. And later on Star Trek, there was Lieutenant Data from the Star Trek The Next Generation, Brent Spiner, who surprisingly I actually met while in the US, and I got his autograph, and it was quite an interesting time there. Yeah, yeah. So basically, growing up in the media, seeing TV, being aware of what's going on around me, you see movies, you see television, these roles and personalities, again, but you see, they were foreign personalities. These were people not in the Pakistani context, they were not South Asians, they didn't look like me, they didn't talk like me, but they behaved like me. So I had some frame of reference, right? And I admired their perseverance, I admired their behavior, their compassion, their leadership role, the appreciation the society gave them for their actions, and helping others and being helpful and progressive. So yes, that I believe was definitely an influence on me while growing up. And the second, I guess, kind of factor that comes in when you look at society is you try to look around you and you see who else is like me. And there weren't many people like me at all when growing up. So as I said, while growing up, I had these people that I was reading about in comic books or television or movies or things like that. But after I, understood what autism is, what Asperger syndrome is, I looked at other self-advocates, and by that time, they were writing articles and books, and I've read a lot of books of Dr. Temple Grandin, whose mother I actually met while in the US at a conference, and getting to know the story, it's quite incredible. So again, what is missing in our part of the world are these stories and media portrayals of people on the spectrum, local people, people like you and me, people who are of the culture. And that is the, I guess, the sad part, that there are not many of those stories that to look at. There's perhaps mine, maybe Ahmad Siddiqui, but then who else? No one else. I mean, they're afraid to talk or afraid to publish or write. I believe there are people abroad now, maybe who live in the UK or in Canada, children of Pakistani origin parents who migrated abroad and were diagnosed later on. Maybe they've written a book, but again, you see, they're outside our culture now. They're looking at frames of reference and language that and culture that is different from ours. It's a different environment here and there, right? So as a consequence, I believe the change is coming slowly. I did mention that I wrote a book, co-authored a book on the subject, and which now is a textbook. Literally, it's given to every teenager on the autism spectrum in the world, by their local schools, and it's a kind of a way to sort of talk, from somebody who's like you. So that's something that can be done for free. Just go to Google, you go to YouTube, look at the interviews and of other self-advocates around the world. They weren't that different from us or people on the other spectrum, while they were growing up. Temple Grandin was non-verbal, Stephen Shore was non-verbal, and through their support and systems in place, it took them years and decades, but well, they've come a long way, and they've shared their story. So that's something that I believe can be encouraged for advocates and self-advocates, both, that your story can be written. There are a lot of parents and mothers in the US who've written books about how they raise their children and the progress and the setbacks and what they've achieved, and kind of sharing these war stories, things like that. So there's a lot that we can learn from the world, and we're not alone. There's a lot of people out there like you. They've done it. You just have to. You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
And there's so much support. I like to mention over here, okay, like you said, that there was nobody around me who was like me. And similar to my daughter's story, when 7 years ago or 7.5 years ago, when I started looking around for children like her to be able to better understand कि families ने क्या करा है, किस तरह cope करा है, क्या navigational systems थे, I actually had to resort to support groups abroad, because there was no support group. And when I would tell them, well, the situation works a little different here, they couldn't comprehend it, because they said, well, what do you mean it works different? And so over the years, they have been able to understand our narrative also, which is cultural differences, spatial differences. Itni sari wajuhat hai. Fazia, who's a very, very avid inner to SNP, live on SNP, said that I know Temple Grandin says to expose to everything, but how to gauge what they like. by interest, by excitement, even though they may not be good at it. And I think she is referring to young boys who are growing up and how to understand their interests and, expand their horizons.
Right. So again, this is not one question. It's a lot of questions, but I'll try to sort of compress it. What happens is that the model that is followed in the past has been a model of regression and difference, right? So special educators were looking at what your child cannot do and trying to make your child do that particular thing. However, the current model of inclusion in the US and other countries right now is a model of ability. So you look at what your child can do. So, if your child cannot do a particular thing, then don't try to make your child do it. Access your child's abilities and cognition and understanding through what they can understand or what they like, not what they dislike. For example, if your child likes cartoons, then teach him using those cartoons, using those examples, and using cartoon as a reward system, perhaps, stickers and toys and things like that related to that. So that deficient model doesn't work. We know that now through evidence and years of practice and research. The model that uses ability, the ability based model, that works much better because it's focused on the child's interests, and children want to do things that they're interested in. If something makes them happy, try to use it as a mechanism to teach them those particular things. I think this is very well explained in the structured teaching method, which is known as TEACHCCH, so University of Chicago created that through Gary Mesebov maybe about 20 years ago. So that the structured teaching system uses that model, and a lot of other systems also. So use their interests, and this is something that a special educator does particularly well. So special educators are trained in this, and if you tell them to create curriculum and content specifically to that child and for that child, I'll give an example. So there's a system called Social Stories by Carol Gray, and in Social Stories, you basically tell a child a story that you want them to learn from, and the characters are replaced by the child's name. So the child becomes a character in that story, right? In the same way, going forward, current implementations of Social Stories now include comic books that are designed and customized for that particular child. So in a comic book, you can actually cut a photograph of your child's face from a photograph and stick it on the comic book. So that character literally becomes that child. So the child can even see visually, what they, and this could be a complicated story. It could be something that they have to learn a skill, anything at all, just to build up interest. And once it becomes relatable, once it becomes specific to that child, the understanding and the recontextualization process becomes easier. The child is then able to understand it from a literal point of view, as opposed to a episodic or anecdotal point of view.
And when we are talking about this, it takes me back to something that we were talking about earlier in our conversation, was a simple movement as stemming or flapping. At first, onlookers and even your mother, your people who are closest to you, and you as a child perhaps feel that they might be able to understand you best, and yet they can't get these obsessive behaviors, these compulsive behaviors, right, which are sensory driven, which are auditory driven, which are motor skill driven. One of the questions that has just come in from Hiba Masood is how to differentiate between interest and obsession. Does that even matter? Should an interest be encouraged without limits, or is there a happy medium? Any happy medium for it?
Well, based on what I've observed and a lot of the writings of other people on the spectrum also, we've pretty much confirmed that for somebody on the spectrum, you don't have interests, you have obsessions. So those interests become so encompassing that they encompass everything you do, everything you think about. You just think about that one particular thing, and it becomes sort of a driving force, and that's not that different from a lot of people around you. Some people may really like a particular kind of food, or they may really like a particular kind of popular culture thing, like Star Wars, or comic books or superheroes or things like that. So these interests, there was an article written about 20 years ago by Steve Silverman in the Wired magazine, and that article's name was the Geek Syndrome, which was talking about people in Silicon Valley, California, programmers and children of programmers
Yeah.
having one particular mindset or behavior. And that was so huge that they started then having friends from within those groups. So only a kid of a programmer would have another friend who's also parents are also programmers. So
Yeah.
why were programmers producing these rather oddly, strangely behavioral children who you would use word like geek or nerd? I don't know. Perhaps they are derogatory words now, but let's. I think in popular culture, it's called nerd culture.
Yeah.
People who obsess about anime or perhaps fan
Gaming. It
fiction
could be
or
gaming or some kind
comic
of
books, things like that. So a lot of this is actually very common, and these are not just interests; they're obsessions. They encompass everything you do. You eventually start dressing up like your favorite cartoon characters. It's called cosplay. So these things are very, very common, and it allows socialization, it allows role playing, it allows social interaction from a context of a learned environment. That basically means that suppose you see a video of somebody telling a joke. Now, if you want to make somebody laugh, you will try to repeat those same words, the same body language, the same whatever you've seen. So, for a person with special needs or a person on the autism spectrum, they basically are mimicking behaviors that they've seen before, and they're trying to recontextualize them in a social environment in order to make friends, in order to blend in order to fit in better, perhaps, or just have a casual conversation. But they don't know, or they have too much fear or anxiety to engage, and therefore they repeat that thing which they've seen before. So if your child has never seen somebody talking or telling a joke or in that social context, how would they repeat what they haven't seen? So this is why it's important for such children to be, let's say, given the opportunity to participate in the public, to go out there, to look at other children play, even though they might not be able to play with them, but at least observe them, at least see them in their environment, so they know what play looks like, what it feels like, how does conversation start, how do you hold a conversation. These are all things that sometimes, because of the lack of eye contact, because that's a very common physical behavior among people on the autism spectrum, they do have lack of eye contact. As a consequence, they miss those social cues about facial language, emotion, reciprocation, communication, things which take much longer to learn, and they literally have to be self-taught, at a later stage. So, I guess that partially answers your question.
Yeah. And also, what you just mentioned, that as a culture in Pakistan, the stigmas and the taboos override कि हम अपने बच्चों को संवार सकते हैं, as opposed to we need to fix them, you know. So a lot of parents over here, in behind closed doors, are still trying to fix, whereas we try and explain to parents again and again that your child is not broken. He does not need fixing. He just needs to be exposed to a different kind of environment, perhaps the same kind of environment with a different technique, so that he may blossom as well. Because what you are primarily doing by caging him or prisoning him inside behind closed doors is numbing the sensory, advantages that he may have. You know, um, as you mentioned earlier on when we started this conversation, is that you could read really fast, and hence the reading and the exposure to literature became accessible for you. You know, parents don't usually understand or don't usually follow that. I do think that there is progress taking place, there is awareness coming in, and people are trying, parents are trying, individuals are trying to help out. One of the things that Fazli, you mentioned was that you want to address special educators, you want to address doctors, because over the years your knowledge you've learned so much, you've experienced so much, that is not just about answering those daily schedule questions from the parents. You know, parents are scared, parents want to know, parents want to learn, they want to experience other people's experiences. and there's so much to talk about there. There's why do children on the autism spectrum have to limit their diets to certain foods, and ऊपर से मदर्स को सिर्फ बताया गया है कि भाई इसको शुगर रश होगा, आप शुगर एलिमिनेट कर दें, आप ग्लूटेन एलिमिनेट कर दें, आप डेयरी एलिमिनेट कर दें. बट डू पेरेंट्स एक्चुअली अंडरस्टैंड व्हाई दिस इज हैपनिंग?
Okay, I think this is probably like 10 questions, where I'll try to answer them one by one.
Yes.
Okay, the most important thing, you're right, nutrition has a very important role. Science has discovered, and you can look this up, that in the human body there are 10 times more bacteria cells and all kinds of other things as opposed to human cells. And so we basically have something called a microbiome. Our bodies are basically relying on good bacteria to process our food, to convert it into energy, to break it down, and to create hormones and other chemicals that basically help us grow as a person, and look at the world and navigate it around us. The problem that has happened in the past couple of 100 years is the industrialization of food, and the mass production of a lot of things has led to cheaper ingredients, alternatives. For example, vitamin C is such a positive thing for people, right? You get sick if you don't take it in. And vitamin C is, for example, ascorbic acid. Now, ascorbic acid actually tastes pretty much the same as citric acid. Now, citric acid is like a cheaper version of some chemical that you can create artificially, and it pretty much tastes like vitamin C. So people started putting citric acid in foods, in pretty much everything you drink, beverages, cold drinks, toffee, sweets, everything, desserts, as opposed to vitamin C, because vitamin C doesn't last very long. It gets heat, it's not tolerant to heat. It sort of decomposes. So as a consequence, preservatives are used, artificial sweeteners are used, artificial flavorings are used, colors are used, all kinds of things that basically make the food last longer, but it's a bit less, let's just say it's less nutritious, right? Another example being that hundreds of years ago, in fact, for the past maybe 20,000 years, we have evidence that our ancestors were drinking milk from cows and goats and buffaloes and so on. And this milk was unpasteurized. And they were creating cheese and all kinds of things from that milk and consuming it. Now, those bacteria were actually maybe good bacteria, and goes inside you and does good things and so on. But in the more developed country like the West, for example, if you go there, the pressures of the environment and medicine and health ensure that everything is a bit sanitized. There's chemicals being used everywhere. There's no dust. You don't see insects flying literally. So everything is sanitized. There's less bacteria. There's less viruses. Yes, it's more safer, but as a consequence, your immune system is now more vulnerable to other things, and this sort of fights that the human body undergoes when it gets attacked by a pathogen or a virus and some things like that. So I would say that perhaps in the developing countries, we still are exposed to these things a bit more. So that's why perhaps our numbers are not that high of anything. Even the COVID people are saying that perhaps there's some vaccine or some innate immunity system that perhaps is a bit more here than opposed to other countries. But again, that's a different conversation. So yes, the food is a very important part. The food becomes your bones, it becomes your blood, it becomes, you take it inside you, and these are the ingredients that help you grow as a healthy individual. So I would say the consumption of the right kinds of food, lesser use of processed food is important for people, and especially children. Most of the food they eat tends to be processed, like chips and sweets and things, and they have high amounts of sugar, and even the sugar inside them is corn or extract sugar, so it's made from corn syrup, which is again genetically, again that's again different conversation. But the point here is that you have to be very careful about what you feed children, and there is a lot of evidence, even medical research has shown that there are certain kinds of diets that may help your child. One of them is the GFCF diet, the gluten-free, casein-free diet, which basically minimizes the gluten that is found in wheat, any kind of grain, or the casein, which is a protein in milk. So people use milk alternatives, and then to supplement their calcium, they use calcium supplements or other kind of sources for calcium. The point here is that Parents should actively talk to a nutritionist. A medical support or medical expert should be consulted to advise them to the best nutrition they can offer their child. Please do not try to buy these easily packaged, easily available, processed packaged foods that are available closest to you. I don't think they're healthy for children in the long run. Maybe for a short duration, but that should not be the only alternative. Consult an expert in nutrition and see what other people are feeding them, and particularly go for more organic as much as possible kinds of inputs. I think you also asked about the whole fact that children, the whole neurodiversity sort of debate that's happening now. Children with autism have something called macrocephaly, and that means that the brain size is slightly inflamed or larger as opposed to sort of so-called neurotypical children, right? And what happens is that that's a phenotype, so it's something that you can observe among children with autism. The brain just seems larger, the head seems larger because it's inflamed. And what generally happens is that a lot of people have had that assumption that okay, maybe the child is unable to use all or most parts of that brain. Maybe the child has issues understanding emotion. Maybe the child has issues processing information, sounds, other things. But actually, it's the other way around. It's actually a super-powered brain, and that's the equivalent of putting a child in the seat of a car. A child is not designed to push the brake pedals or drive the wheel or sit in the right position, and can obviously hurt themselves, right? But if you so that's the whole problem that right now I have observed that happens for a person on the autism spectrum, or people who have different kinds of diverse brains, that their brains are actually capable of a lot of incredible things when given the right stimulation through neuroplasticity. They do adapt, they do change, everyone changes over time. People do learn and grow. However, their brain sometimes is too powerful to control. There are simply a lot of these barriers are not there. It's complete, access to everything at the same time. That's like listening to music at full volume while seeing a movie at full volume, while some food is cooking in front of you at full, that smell is very strong, while something is vibrating under. So sensory overload, that's what I'm getting at. The
Yeah.
brain sometimes cannot handle all of this information, and it goes into self withdrawal or protection mode automatically to protect itself. And that's why these children retreat into their own world. They kind of play back their memories on repeat, and whatever they've seen when they were perhaps happier at a different time, and they try to lose out on the now simply because they're unable to process that information, which is simply too much sensory overload, which obviously the occupational therapists are trained to overcome and manage. So I would generally say that again, there's a lot of questions you asked me. I think one other important question I'd like to address is that of the stim, or I think it's called self stimulation. For example, you see some people at the spectrum doing this, right? When they have anxiety, or generally just shaking their hand or rocking the chair, clicking their pen, perhaps, moving back and forth, rocking and so on. So what exactly goes on? I've done actually a lot of research on this and contacted other self advocates around the world who've confirmed my suspicions. And a lot of research is happening right now medically on this. What we've discovered is that the human body, the joints inside the body, any joint. So this is a joint, that's a joint. These are joints, that the things that bend, right? These joints contain a fluid called synovial fluid, and this lubricates your joints, right? It allows you to move back and forward without injuring any part of your body. And this chemical synovial fluid is a normal organic thing that your body makes. It's full of carbon dioxide. So what basically happens is that when you sort of pull your finger, you get this popping sound, right? And that popping sound happens because a vacuum is created in that area, in that joint, and therefore the vacuum, the carbon dioxide bubbles, go in the vacuum, and your body gets a signal that the amount of concentration in your body of carbon dioxide has reduced, and as a consequence, dopamine is released. And dopamine is a chemical that basically makes people happy. You get it released when you have food, or when you're laughing, or when you're happy. So what happens is, as a consequence, that people on the spectrum are unconsciously, their bodies are trying to release dopamine in order to calm themselves down. It is the only mechanism, sort of a self-defense mechanism, that people on the spectrum have when they have high anxiety, or when they're worried, or when they have sort of, they cannot, they, for example, a child who's finished their work and now they have anxiety, as in, what do I do next? They keep looking around, they keep being distracted, and so on. So this is sort of a self-regulatory mechanism that the brain automatically defaults to, by which the child, when they're trying to actually shake their hand, their brain is actually trying to tell them a signal to actually pull the fingers or pull the hand or some joint or so on, so that the popping sound happens and dopamine is released into the blood, which eventually calms them down. So it's a self-regulating, self-calming mechanism. So that's an example why people on the spectrum seem to move randomly. It happens for a reason, and this is something that they cannot control. It happens. It's a default mechanism for the brain trying to protect the body and regulate and control the body. So I guess I pretty much have answered maybe 3 or 4 questions. Do you have other questions related to what you were asking?
I have lots of questions, firstly, but I had discussed with you that maybe we can break our session into over 2 days, because there's so many more things that I want to talk to you about. It's about how to raise children to become self-advocates. Talk about laws, talk about representation, and talk about raising the bar in Pakistan, and raising awareness in media. So I think these are the questions that I'll set aside, and we can discuss them in another session. There are a lot of questions on our feed right now, but I think we can take one last question, which is sleep regulation.
Yes.
Should we worry sometimes that they are awake in the middle of the night? Would you recommend melatonin supplements?
So yes, it's actually a very common question asked for people with any kind of special needs or sensory issues. So there are 3 things that pretty much are safe. If you consult a doctor, they will normally tell you to take a supplement called melatonin, which is a herbal supplement. And again, you should consult a doctor. Don't take medicine on your own. But the doctor will, of course, recommend it. There is no side effects known for it. It's even safer for children in smaller doses. And this is used to help people get a deeper sleep. It doesn't put you to sleep. It's not like a sleep pill. It just helps you get a deeper sleep. And it does help in most cases. So consult a doctor about it. The second thing I'll mention is that, particularly something that's helped me over the years, is something called a static noise generator. What that basically means is, if you're sleeping, you turn the TV on and make sure the hissing sound is on. You like that static sound that comes, and just put it at low volume, but enough that you can barely hear it. And that sound blocks pretty much every other sound. Just leave it on while you're sleeping. So you obviously have to be close enough to hear it, but in my case, it's fine because I have sensitive hearing. Other than that, if you have some kind of a machine, I think they call it a static noise generation machine, or even on a computer or a phone, you can even download static noise from YouTube and play it in a loop, like that hissing sound that sort of comes. And that pretty much helps people sleep a deeper sleep at night. It kind of tries to block out the invading or intruding or interrupting sound. So maybe that sort of will help you in a better situation. The third, I would say, is also, when you're sleeping, try to not consume sugar maybe at night, or something that is high energy, because obviously, like caffeine or coffee, for some people, they're not able to sleep after having coffee for a few hours, or energy drinks or things like that. So the diet in a way does probably help. Have, perhaps don't have too much sugar at night, or something with less caffeine or no caffeine at all. Tea, for example, does contain caffeine. So does green tea at some quantity. So just think about that also. So these are things that I believe are pretty much safe advice that you can give to anyone.
Right. So, as I mentioned, that we are going to spill over in a second session, hopefully, and have you talk to us about so many other things. So today I'm not looking at a closing of a session, because I do feel that our narrative should go on. But before I bring this session to a close, Fazli, thank you for being such an amazing advocate. because we need more people like you who would become role models for our younger children, because it brings in so much acceptance and understanding to what they are going through. Uh, to sort of close the session, is there something that you would like to say to all the people who are tuned in right now?
So just one point, but maybe there's not enough time. There's a point. I think I'll shift that to the next session then.
Okay.
Uh, hmm. I think one message that a lot of people have asked me about is the whole point of disclosure. Should you disclose,
Yeah.
that you are on the spectrum? I believe in a society like ours, you don't have to unless it's an impairment. For example, if you apply for a job or somewhere, sometimes they might ask you, do you have a physical disability? Now, they're not doing it to discriminate. Sometimes they're making sure that they have the facilities to allow you to access the job, like a lift or a ramp or things like that, right? So, in a way, if it implies and impairs and affects your work and life, then in our society, yes, disclose. But as far as other things, I would say there's no point, of telling the world. Literally, there's no, like, I don't go around with a banner or a sticker or a shirt or a cap that says, I'm on the spectrum. There's no point unless a point comes where it matters, where it's very important for somebody to know that it would affect or impair my working under a certain environment or condition. For example, if I go to a medical doctor and they ask me, then yes, I would tell them, because maybe that affects how I communicate with them, and then they would correspondingly appropriately change their responses. So that's something that's important. That disclosure should actually be a smarter decision. Obviously, your parents need to disclose to the child, and you may need to disclose to the teacher who's teaching your child, or the teacher needs to have a conversation with the child and perhaps with other classmates of that child also, that this is how the child is, so please don't discriminate and things like that. So these are conversations that need to happen at a society level, and I believe it hasn't happened yet in our
Yeah.
society because of the media portrayals. And I go back to that. There are no media portrayals in our media or culture or popular culture about any such thing. There are such things in other regional countries in South Asia. They are in the West, but not yet in our culture. And I believe that's something that, well, I'm trying to change myself. I teach in the media science department at Zabis, and a lot of my students are actually researching and working and on projects regarding special needs and autism. So I believe just by doing my role and trying to encourage others, I believe something is better than nothing. Something is happening.
Absolutely. Firstly, do share your publication under this post, if you may, and then I will speak to you in private about scheduling another session with you. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for speaking to the platform. And I will see you shortly.
Thank you.
I will message you. Take care of yourself, Fazli, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. And that was Fazli Azim, and I am going to schedule another session with him because I think they are so. I think I need to revise my the way I have structured my questions, and this is all a learning process. This is all a learning understanding. कि जब मेरे पास सवालात हों तो I need to have them very very well thought out and clear, so that people can address them similarly. I think Fazli is doing a wonderful job. Fazli is raising awareness, raising advocates, and so that brings us to so many things that we think about. It allows us के हम सोचें कि as parents, माँ बाप होते हुए, Fazli said something really interesting. He said that the main shift is, or the main narrative is, that what cannot be done, what are we not good at. एक ये उस तरह से होती है बात कि अगर हम अपने मीडिया को देखें तो जब भी रोने धोने, डिप्रेशन, एंजाइटी, कुछ कुछ बुरा हो रहा है, the viewership is there. और जब कुछ अच्छा हो रहा है और किसी चीज की अवेयरनेस रेज हो रही है, the viewership is here because people like that sensitization, that excitement. अब क्या होगा, you know. Similarly, अगर हम इसको इस डायरेक्शन में लेके चले, as Fazli mentioned, कि what are we good at? What are our advantages? What are the things that we like? Maybe the bar is going to go higher for our children. Hiba had asked, about obsession versus like. कि this is the interest, but this is the obsession. And Fazil ने बहुत अच्छी तरीके से वो explain करा कि yes, there are obsessions and obsessions can be figured out as obsessions. However, when you like something and when you have a general interest, so we see कि even with neurotypical children, the interests keep wearing on and off. एक पूरा साल एक interest रहेगा and it will be maximized and the child will do role play, and as another year goes by, there will be a new interest. So let's keep thinking, let's keep reflecting. I am going to be speaking with Fazli right now and hopefully get him on to speak to you about so many other questions we have. So I hope कि आप सोचें, समझें. And one of my friends also mentioned कि ये जो studies that was printed yesterday, that the UK studies are mentioning कि July and August तक बहुत ज़्यादा numbers होंगे और बहुत ज़्यादा death toll होगा, कि they are actually not verified. So another thing, verified information. We are constantly tackling that, constantly understanding that more information needs to be verified, more news needs to be verified. That does not take away from the fact that at this point in time, we need to be safe. We need to be at home. We need to restrict our movement. हम अपना ख्याल खुद रख सकते हैं. Now there are a lot of families over the last few days जो mention ये कर रही हैं कि हमारा zero contact रहा है, zero movement रही है, and yet cases of corona positive have jumped up in their houses. And then, there is not much we can do. Having said that, we can be responsible citizens. We can be responsible human beings. So sochiye, samjhiye, and thank you for tuning in, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care of yourselves and be good to your heart and brain. Khuda Hafiz.